Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another podcast and YouTube video on Gaudium et Spes 22. You can also see it. It'll be linked on my blog, gaudiumetsspes22.com, as well as my various blog posts. I'm excited tonight. I have an old friend, and it seems like you're an old friend. You're not really an old friend, but it seems like we've known each other now for what, 5 years,
10 years, 15
10,
going on,
10,
Larry.
10 yeah, I guess. Yeah,
I think we met and we met online before we met in real life.
yeah, that's
Uh,
true. Well,
uh,
actually, yeah, because
and
Carrie and I, my wife and I, had dinner with you and Esther, your wife, in Rome near Piazza Navona in 2012 or 13. So, yeah, that's 10 or 11 years ago. And we knew each other before then. So, yeah. Okay. So,
it's been a minute, and yeah, we'll say friend of many years. How's that? Although I feel old now.
yeah.
Uh,
So we've only met in person once at one time in Rome. And that
which
was
is a
that.
damn shame, and we have to rectify that, if you don't mind
Yes,
my
we do.
saying
But
so.
well, for those viewers and or listeners who do not know who Dr. Christopher Altieri is, and that is my guest, Dr. Christopher Altieri. He used to work for Vatican Radio. He used to be first the Rome bureau chief, then the international editor, then executive editor at the Catholic Herald. Now he is teacher extraordinaire, jack of all trades, teaching everything, doing everything at his alma mater, Fairfield Prep up in Connecticut, which is a Jesuit prep school.
It
Uh,
sure is.
yeah, so yeah, right in line with our Holy Father and everything Jesuit these days. And how is that for a segue? Because I want to segue right in now to a Jesuit issue. And it's something that you have written extensively on. So my main interest in interviewing today is actually what I think most of the listeners are going to be interested in, who actually follow your journalism. And I still, no matter that you're a teacher and all that, and a PhD and all that, I still think your greatest talent in life is that you are one of the finest journalists, Catholic journalists. I mean, I don't know if I should put that qualifier, a Catholic journalist. You're a journalist who writes on Catholic issues, and you're one of the finest ones out there, in my opinion. You and John Allen and a few others. And so I think a lot of people feel the same. And so they follow your stuff. So I really did want to, in light of recent, we both write for Catholic World Report, and you had a series of articles and essays on the scandal involving the Jesuit Father Rupnik. I think that's Rupnik or Rupnik. I'm not certain. How do you pronounce it, Chris? Do you know?
Yeah, I believe it's Rupnik.
Rupnik.
Yeah, he's Slovenian. Uh,
Yes, from Slovenia. And for the viewers, and the listeners who don't know, Father Rupnik started a female religious order in Slovenia, and then years later was accused by women in that religious order of sexual abuse through a kind of misuse of spiritual direction in his role as confessor and head of the order. The typical kind of psychological manipulation and intimidation that often happens, especially when a figure becomes an almost cult-like figure as the head of a religious organization. And this all comes out, and then long story short, he actually absolved a woman in the confessional with whom he had had sex, which is an excommunicatable offense. He was excommunicated officially, but then the excommunication was lifted. You can stop me at any point here, Chris, if I'm getting something wrong, after a few mea culpas on his part. And now he's sort of been rehabilitated. And also in the background in all of this is he's one of the more famous ecclesiastical artists in the church. Today, his art is all over the place in some very important shrines and places in Europe. And he was invited to give talks to the papal household, Lenten reflections to the papal household, despite these accusations. And so,
well, there, yeah, and it might be a
go
point to
ahead now.
jump in.
What?
Yeah,
What?
that it's more. It was more than accusations. According to the timeline that the Jesuits themselves put out, fairly reluctantly, one might say. Uh, he was invited to preach the Lenten retreat. Now he was filling in for Father Cantalamessa, I believe, who was unwell or had some surgery scheduled or something like that. And this was in March of 2020. So we're in, the beginning of Rona tide, lockdown, panic. The
Yeah.
world everyone's scared, right? And uh, it was a pretty confused and confusing time, which is important to remember for all of this. But the College of Judges that had the case, the absolving an accomplice is what the technical language calls it. Uh, they had already decided on the fact of the business, and were sort of trying to figure out what to do before they pronounced sentence officially. So they'd taken a vote on that, and reports are that they voted unanimously to find him guilty on the question of fact. So he did the thing they said he did. And eventually they did confirm or ratify the excommunication. I'd say it is not an excommunicable offense. I think it is more precise to say that when he did the thing, he incurred an excommunication.
Automatic.
Late sententiae, as we say,
Yeah.
right? So what happened was they turned that late sententiae excommunication into an excommunication ferende sententiae,
Yes.
which is a sort of official ratification of the effect that the commission of the act itself had. Now, canon lawyers will debate, and do what exactly a late sententiae excommunication is, what it entails, and even whether it really is possible, but it's there and it's on the books, and that's what happened. And I don't know that he gave a few mea culpa. It looks like he sort of, and I think I put this in copy at one point, he basically pinky swore that he was really, really sorry.
Yeah.
And it was back to business as usual. Although back to business as usual in this case, what does that exactly mean? Because it doesn't look like that the restrictions under which he was operating were terribly restrictive. As you noted, he was trotting around the world, giving conferences, leading retreats, including one in the Apostolic Palace. He was receiving awards. He was getting, calling on the Holy Father in the Apostolic Palace. And people will say to me at that point, Altieri, he doesn't live in the Apostolic Palace. He lives in Santa Marta, the Domus Sanctae Martae, right? This sort of guest house hotel on the Vatican grounds. Dear listeners, you're wrong. All that means is that the Apostolic Palace is now inside Santa Marta, you see. The Apostolic Palace is where the Pope lives. It's kind of like the president. Whatever plane he's flying on is Air Force One.
Right.
Now, the building that we refer to as the Apostolic Palace is still there, and who knows whether anybody's going to use it again for, living. But a lot of the business of governing the church gets done there. Up in the third loggia, you've got the Secretariat of State, right? These sorts of things are all there and still going concerns. But if I may be allowed this pedantic digression, Larry,
go ahead.
There you have it. Anyway, carry on. I'm sure you have lots.
No.
What do you want to know about Rupnik?
Well, that's fine. But I like all that sort of inside baseball information about Vatican City State. A lot of people, we know about the Vatican City State, but we don't know about. I never knew that the Secretariat of State was, on the third floor there in the Apostolic Palace. I figured it was somewhere in there. It was a big mystery to me. But anyway, what I actually read somewhere today, and I'll be brutally honest, I can't even remember the source, but I distinctly remember reading this, where the journalist claimed that the excommunication of Rupnik was actually lifted by Pope Francis himself.
Well,
can you confirm or not confirm that? Or
I can't confirm that. And here's the guy, I'm chafing and champing at the bit. I'm in southwestern Connecticut right now, Larry, not in Rome, and
yeah.
I hope I'd give my left something to be there right now, but I can't.
Oh, come on. Are you saying that you just don't have the same access to the corridors of Vatican power that you once did, Christopher?
I'm saying exactly that, Larry, and because I can't,
That's good. That's fine. You're cool with me.
Run across the street and go and and look a guy in the
eye.
Let me ask him a question.
The reason why I ask it, though, let me put it this way: would it surprise you if Pope Francis had a role to play in the lifting of the excommunication of Father Rupnik? Because that's sort of one of the sort of backstories here, right? What we have is something of Jesuit favoritism going on here for a celebrity Jesuit priest artist. And the Pope seems to do this a lot with prelates or priests who have been accused of nefarious things, but who he knows them personally. And so he has a tendency to be, boys will be boys, I guess. That's the I don't know what the tendency is, but
I would really, I understand and sympathize with the characterization. I've done my very best to resist those sorts of characterizations in my own analysis of it.
Right.
For the very simple reason that I haven't been able to talk to the guy and wouldn't want to without having a conversation, and again, being able to look a fella in the eye and judge not only words but body language and that sort of thing. Now, he hasn't said anything about it. I can say that yes, there is a track record there, right?
Yes.
There just is, and there's no getting around that. Whether you want to go back to Bishop Juan Barros, the Chilean bishop who was a protege of Fernando Caradima, Chile's answer to Ted McCarrick, if you will, sort of the celebrity abuser priest who brought up a bunch of guys, and among whom was Barros. He got the See of Osorno in northern Chile back in the earlier part of the Pope Francis's reign.
Yeah.
The folks there did not like him, didn't want him. There was sustained opposition, sustained protest, for months and months and months. A part of the Pope's trip to Chile was a sort of it was supposed to be a fence mending exercise, right?
It was a disaster.
And well, yeah, because he accused the folks who were sort of the three victim advocates who were leading the agitation and leading reform and accountability efforts in Chile.
Yeah.
They were also, interestingly, the fellows on the strength of whose testimony the Vatican's own canonical criminal tribunal eventually found Karadima guilty. Right.
Yeah,
So they testified
yeah.
against Karadima, and he got finally in 2011, I think it was, convicted and sentenced to a life of prayer and penance. Francis accused these guys of calumny.
Yeah.
And you say, well, how's that? And he said, well, they don't have any proof. And he said, well, they are the proof. They're the eyewitness. Now you can say you don't believe them, right? But
Yeah.
your own criminal tribunal your canonical criminal tribunal has found them to be credible witnesses. So which is it going to be, right? That was sort of the abuse and cover up hand grenade that blew up in Francis's lap. And he's the one who, pulled the pin on it and dropped it in his lap. I probably said that the last time too.
Yeah.
But
that's fine.
That's the way.
But then there was the Zanchetta affair as well.
Zanchetta, right? Yeah.
Oh, Zanchetta. You're right. You're absolutely right. Zanchetta.
In his native Argentina, he was another one. Now, he had been the general secretary of the Argentinian Bishops' Conference for a lot of years when Francis, as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, was ex officio president of the conference, and so they'd worked closely together. Barros was one of the first miters that Francis gave out when he came into the See of Peter. Zanchetta was not a savory character. He liked to get handsy with seminarians, apparently, among other things.
Yes.
Complaints in about 2015 from some senior officials in Oran, which was the see to which Zanchetta had been appointed.
Yes.
They made reports. Francis summoned Zanchetta, who apparently was able to give Pope Francis a story that Francis was willing to buy. He believed the word of his friend, the bishop, over, well, the evidence of his senses and the testimony of several different people. There was some back and forth that continued. Eventually in 2017, Pope Francis asked for and received Zanchetta's resignation. And so he sent Zanchetta quietly to go get his head shrunk with another Jesuit confrere in Belgium, I want to say, but don't quote me on that. And after he got a clean bill of health, he was brought back to the Vatican, where he was put in a sinecure in the administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See. That's the sort of the central bank of the Vatican, the sovereign asset manager, which was an interesting appointment because of how it turns out that Zanchetta was also getting looked at for some not entirely regular management of diocesan finances and real property. So it was all very, very very fishy, to say the least. So you have a track record there, right? We were talking about and folks, there's a lot more to the Zanchetta story. We could spend the rest of our time rehashing it, but read about it. Nicole Winfield at the Associated Press, she's the Vatican beat reporter for the AP. She did yeoman's work on that story. Lots of us were on it. I had a a little hand in the reporting of that story myself. But the other reporter who did great work for Crux was Ines San Martin, who was all over the Zanchetta story and kept it in the news when it looked like it was going to disappear. Because he got in trouble. He got in trouble with the civil authorities, the secular arm. Was eventually convicted in his native land, criminally convicted.
And what does the thing that vexes me, and thank you for that. That's a very detailed accounting, and obviously you're right. It's that just barely scratches the surface.
All of this, yeah, to say that there's a reason that people are suspicious of Francis's own direct and personal role in the Rupnik affair. But even if there hadn't been the track record to which we could point, right? Francis got involved in an Italian case, Mauro Insoli, where he commuted a sentence of defrocking, and eventually the guy went back and he was eventually defrocked, I believe, but not until after the Italian authorities got their paws on him. And you sort of go, well, why?
Yeah,
what are you doing? So there's all of that, and even if there hadn't been, though, it is it doesn't quite beggar credulity, but it certainly is not lacking in verisimilitude that the Pope should be at least informed of a figure with as high a profile as Rupnik and ties to the Holy Father's own Jesuit order, and frankly, his historical ties to the Apostolic Palace, right? It was John Paul II who set him up at the Centro Aletti back in the early 90s, in 1993, I believe. So there's a lot to suggest that it'd be awful surprising if the Pope didn't have a personal hand in this somewhere along the line. And that's without Francis's penchant for micromanagement and personal involvement.
Yeah. And that brings me kind of to, the fundament of what I want to drive at here. This is not, I'm not trying to, I've been accused of this. I'm not a huge Pope Francis fan. Everybody knows that. But I'm not also one of those out there that relishes trashing the Holy Father. And I certainly don't believe he's a heretic or any of the worst things that are thrown at him. I happen to think he's not a very good Pope. Now, I know you don't necessarily share that view, but that's my view. I think he's, let's just leave it at that, not a very good Pope. All that being said, though, I mean, other popes have failed with regard to this issue of sexual abuse and clamping down on sexual abuse. This isn't simply a Pope Francis phenomenon, is it? I mean, there seems, in other words, what accounts for this disconnect? I don't believe for one second that John Paul or Pope Francis are in their heart of hearts don't think that sexual abuse is a horrible thing. I think they both thought it's a horrible thing. But what accounts then for the disconnect between that realization that clerical sexual abuse is actually a terrible cancer and blight in the church, and both JP2 and Francis said so? I'm leaving Benedict out here because his legacy is, I think, is a more positive one in this regard. And so what accounts for this disconnect when then all of a sudden you find, oh, John Paul turns a blind eye to a Maciel, or and Pope Francis involves himself in, in being really overly friendly and kind to Zanchetta and Barros and people. So what accounts for this?
You and I will perhaps take different views of this, Larry, and I think that's fine. But I'm not nearly as willing as you are to let Benedict off the hook.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
He's the one who did not suppress the Legion. He had
So they're all guilty.
the wherewithal to do it. Well, they're all guilty.
Well, let's put it this way: they all have this disconnect that I'm talking about.
They all failed.
Yes.
And the way you know that they all failed is that we're still dealing with the issue, and we'll continue to deal with it so long as responsibility, transparency, and accountability are not or responsibility, accountability, transparency, I think was the order that Francis's big sort of dog and pony show back in 2019 on safeguarding in the church put it. As long as those are, the buzzwords and PR boilerplate rather than real watchwords, this is what we're gonna get. I think that perhaps, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but I can tell you my view of it and what I've
absolutely
come around.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah. The reason that we are as frustrated as we are at this point, and I think that this is true across the spectrum of opinion in the church. There are people. No one will accuse me of being a shill for Francis either, by the way.
Exactly.
But I've said it, and I will keep saying it as long as I have to. He did not create this crisis.
No, he did not.
And neither did Benedict, neither did John Paul, not any one of them. And by the way, neither did Paul VI, and neither did John the 23rd. And we'll leave John Paul I out of it. Sorry, are we supposed to call him Blessed John Paul I now, I guess? I'm
not going to stand on protocol here, Chris. You go right ahead.
Let's just say that as long as we're talking about these men as governors of the church and their capacity as governors, I'm gonna skip the pious titles.
Exactly.
The thing is, look, the church tells me that Paul VI and John Paul II are saints in heaven, and I accept that because I'm a good son of Holy Mother Church. They're not there because of their governance. They're there despite it.
Yes, I agree.
And that's probably the case of everyone who is a sainted pope, by the way. But these are the guys who, in living memory, did not deal with a very grave crisis, about which, by the way, they knew. So there's that. Francis promised to do better, and he hasn't.
That's right.
And he said when facts came to light regarding the Barros situation in 2018, I was part of the problem. It was a very frank admission, and a breath of fresh air. Made a lot of us hopeful that maybe, all right, he's going to pull the trigger now, right? That we're gonna really see things change, and what we saw were a bunch of paper reforms that he has been very selective about using,
like Vos Estis.
Vos Estis Lux Mundi is the big one, right?
Which seems to be toothless.
Well, on paper it's not toothless, but I mean, what good is a law that you're not going to use?
Exactly.
And it's not to say that it's been, completely unused, but it hasn't been consistently used.
Well,
It
it hasn't been
hasn't.
consistently used because there's a deep flaw, if you want to put it this way, or at least one really bad negative side effect of the manner in which the Catholic Church conceives papal authority, which it doesn't matter what canon law says, and it doesn't matter what documents are in place. The Pope can abrogate them all in an instant, no matter what. He can do whatever the heck he darn well feels like, no matter what. And so yeah, vos estis has teeth, but its teeth will only go as far as the Pope wants to wield those teeth, and apparently in some instances he hasn't wanted to.
That's what it looks like to me. I think of the case of Richard Malone in Buffalo, and if Buffalo was not a vos estis case, then nothing is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's it's just the way it is. Um, and so and they could have used vos estis, and they decided to go the route of an apostolic visitation. Eventually, Bishop Malone did decide that it was time for Bishop Malone not to be Bishop of Buffalo anymore.
yeah,
uh you
yeah,
know but there was no criminal investigation, there was no criminal trial for cover up of abuse. There was none of that. And it was pretty shocking that there wasn't, and it was pretty clear that it was a decision not to use vos estis. Why? Well, for one reason, they wouldn't say why, but it bears mention that it's easy to keep a report of an apostolic visitation under wraps. It is
yeah,
the entire
yeah,
business is
yeah,
conducted under pontifical secret, and the report of the visitators is delivered directly to the Pope. He can give it to whoever he wants to then look at it and make recommendations, but
yeah,
uh, it keeps things neat and tidy.
yeah. Sure does. And oh, I had something I was going to ask you, and it just left my mind. But I want to move on to. I mean, on the same topic, and I don't want to beat this topic to death. But it's an important topic. I mean, well, let me back up and let me sort of maybe take back what I just said. Um, in terms of downplaying the topic. I mean, you can disagree or agree, but this is probably in the minds of most lay Catholic, I think especially, is the most important issue confronting the church today. The issue of not just the issue of clerical sexual abuse, but the issue of the church's response to clerical sexual abuse and episcopal sexual abuse and episcopal cover up, and now perhaps even papal cover ups. This seems to be the elephant in the living room that I'm wondering, um, and you can answer this: are is the hierarchy absolutely clueless? Are they completely clueless as to the fact that they have zero credibility in the eyes of most lay people right now? And do they not understand that they need to restore that credibility through concrete action and not more documents and words? I know that's sort of an open-ended rhetorical question, but your thoughts on my little rant right there?
Uh, if, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, Larry,
Yeah,
I just don't know, whether it's
yeah. It's just
a failure of moral imagination, whether it is uh, an unwillingness to take hard advice or to seek
Yeah. Yeah.
and to listen to hard advice, whether it's a question of, you know, a straightforward question of, competence in these
Well,
matters, that
yeah.
do they have the wherewithal to deal with this, or are they so utterly formed or deformed by a broken clerical and hierarchical leadership culture that they're just incapable of seeing it? I don't know. I think of the case of Bishop Rhodes, when he had a guy not too long ago. This is what is he, Fort Wayne, South Bend? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. He was Harrisburg.
And uh, saying, yeah, there were no red flags at a press conference, a couple of weeks, no more than a few weeks after he had first learned of uh, some very untoward behavior on the part of a guy who was only 3 years ordained.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to know at the time was, how do you know there were no red flags? How could you possibly say that at this point?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
there are two possibilities. One is there were red flags and you missed them, and that's bad. And the other possibility is that it is, as you say, there were no red flags, in which case you clearly missed something.
Yeah.
Right? Because a guy doesn't go from, I'm on fire for the gospel and for preaching Christ crucified and risen from the dead, to well, I'm gonna get liquored up and get fresh with a bunch of co-eds, or it doesn't. Sure,
Yeah.
it happens in an instant,
Well,
but 3 years out from seminary, it's a safe bet that
yeah. I mean,
there were signs that you missed. And sure, guys can hide all sorts of problems, and bad actors can be very good at masking their true character and intention. Okay, that's true. There is no such thing as a perfect system. And even if there were, there are no perfect people. There are going to be mistakes, right? But it struck me that the thing to say at that point is, we're going to go to the bottom of the ocean on this one, and we're going to plumb the depths. We're going to break for whatever we can find. We're going to toss the place. We're going to turn it upside down. We're going to interview everyone who had anything to do with his formation at any point thoroughly.
yes.
We're going to review our processes, our evaluation procedures, our standards, our criteria, and we're going to issue a full report when this is over. And we're not going to spare any expense, and we're not going to cut any corners, and nobody's going to get a pass. And then, and then you do the thing you said you're going to do, I don't think that anything less in a case like that is anything close to adequate. And
Yeah.
it is, it's not the go-to thing.
I just gotta say it's a good thing I have never been and never will be a seminary rector because I would be so draconian in my approach that I would probably get rid of half the seminarians overnight. And because after my experience in the seminary, I said the reason why this is an important issue is because like the German synodal way and in Australia as well, the issue of clerical sex abuse and the church's response to it is, at least on the surface, the pretext for their call for all of these structural changes in church governance and also in church doctrine that we need. As you pointed out, there is this clericalistic hierarchical culture that's broken, and the Germans and so forth aren't entirely wrong. That maybe we need to take a good hard long look at that broken clerical culture. Their answer is to change the structure. My answer is that most of these things are downstream of culture and the church's inability to deal properly with a degraded culture and the quality of people coming into the seminary. I know for a fact when I was in seminary 1978, 1985, both minor and major seminary. And there were, friends of mine and I would sit down, and some of these people are now priests, and we would say, we'd start naming off all of the guys that we knew someday were going to be in prison. And sure enough, about 90% of the guys that we thought were going to be in prison someday were in prison someday. So for a bishop to say, oh, there were no red flags, well, maybe to him, no. But my question is, I think seminary formation has gotten better since 2002 and everything hit the fan. But I'm still wondering. And I don't know. This is not me asking a loaded question. I really want to know. I want to know if seminary formation has gotten more perspicacious in terms of identifying problem guys. That'd be the sort of.
Oh, I think it has, and I should say that I haven't kept close tabs on that situation in Fort Wayne, South Bend, and don't know that Bishop
And I
Rhodes
think
hasn't
Bishop
done
Rhodes
the
is a good man. I mean, he
right
was
thing.
rector at Mount St. Mary's.
Yeah,
And then Bishop of Harris. I think he's a good man. I don't mean to malign him, but I think he mishandled this case.
certainly in the catch up,
In the catch up phase. Yeah.
out of the gate at any rate, right?
Yeah.
The but yeah, I mean, there is a greater awareness of a need to be better at screening.
Yeah.
I think that seminaries in general are still trying to wrap their heads around the best way to deal with a lot of the ambient general cultural
Yeah.
challenges that guys coming in these
Well,
days
they're all addicted to
face.
porn when they come in.
Yeah, this is, I don't know that they're all addicted to porn, but your point
Well,
is
that's what I hear from seminary formators is that
uh
if we were to eliminate every guy that came into the seminary who has a porn problem, I don't know about addiction, but a porn problem, that they're habitual users of porn, we'd have to get rid of 99% of the guys coming in. Uh, so therein is the problem that they face.
you know it certainly is a bigger problem than probably it has been in the past, and that much is evident, undeniable. But it's not the only problem,
Oh, well, yeah, there are many others, but yes.
and there is I think an understanding that something is wrong, that lots of somethings are wrong, and folks are not quite sure what to do about it. And I don't have the answers, right? I wish I did. Um, and I'm glad I'm not in charge. Um, that said, I do think that we need to have a very, very serious, hard, soul searching, soul searing look at
Yeah.
how we form men for the priesthood. And I'm not averse to a ground up rethinking of all sorts of things that are basic right now to clerical culture. That includes, a hard look at clerical celibacy in among the secular clergy. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
I was
know,
just going to bring that issue up.
and we in the Latin West are, not because I think that, if you start ordaining married men, it's going to be a direct uh, deterrent uh, to guys abusing children, because that's not how it works. It
Right.
just,
That's
you know
true.
um but I do wonder about the effect of having men with families in the clerical ranks, men who have, had to develop marketable skills and provide for a family, and aren't dependent upon the goodwill of the bishop for their next meal, and for the roof over their head. How that sort of change would affect the uh, the clerical culture more generally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a conversation that we need to have. That's all. And when I say that,
Yeah.
I don't mean anything more than that.
Well, I say
All
that
right.
I once wrote a blog post on this. As you know, I attend an Anglican ordinariate Catholic parish, and my pastor is married and has 10 children. And it has been an altogether enlightening experience. And in my blog post, I don't make a call one way or the other. We need married priests, or we don't. I mean, I think all too often people who clamor for a married clergy forget that having a married clergy brings with it its own set of headaches.
Oh yeah, you're
It
trading one set of problems for another, and make
it's no cure
no
all
mistake.
answer at all to the problem of sexual abuse. You look in Protestant denominations and you see all kinds of sexual abuse problems, and you end up with a problem of divorced and remarried clergy and all this. It can be an issue. It's no magic bullet answer, and yet at the same time, my experience with Father Eric Bergman, my pastor here, I mean, he's the greatest pastor I've ever had in my life. And I'm wondering out loud in my brain sometimes, is there a connection between the fact that this is the best pastor I've ever had in my entire life and the fact that he's a married man with 10 kids? I wonder. I wonder. So, and I had some great celibate pastors, obviously, some great, great guys, but this guy's the best of them all. And so, at the very least, it's had the scales fall out because I've always been like this huge, even though I was in the seminary and I quit to get married, people think, oh, then you must be against mandatory celibacy. And for decades, no, not. I was always in favor of mandatory celibacy. I'm like Andrew Greeley. He said that it's what makes the priest interesting. Here's Mr. Liberal Andrew Greeley, who was a big fan of mandatory clerical celibacy on the grounds that it gives the priesthood a mystique, not to mention an eschatological focus, not to mention uh, certain practical things. So yeah, it's a complicated question, but I do wonder if it's a question, as you just pointed out, that maybe we can't revisit. Could we take a look at it? Could we at least, consider it?
But your question, if I'm not mistaken, we've gotten a field of it, was about the German, the synodal way, and
Yes, yes.
that, The doctrinal and structural changes that they're proposing, I think, are to some extent a stalking horse. I think that the German bishops don't want to they want to slow the bleeding of members there, because
Yeah.
their money's going to dry up, and they're making a play right now. Not I don't I really don't think they're expecting to get much of anything out of this, but they are expecting to make Rome look bad, and they can maybe turn around to their people and say, hey, ain't our fault. We tried, right?
I think it is
Um,
a stalking horse. I think it is a stalking horse.
how well considered, how well thought out, how realistic it is. I don't know. I'm not sanguine. But there you have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that actually brings me to go ahead.
German bishops trying to do their own thing and have it both ways is not a new story in the church.
A truer statement has never been made in the whole history of true statements.
But it
That
also
is,
goes to, I mean, it's another reason that I don't get I don't get a bee in my bonnet over a lot of the so-called doctrinal confusion that Pope Francis is frequently accused of sowing. It
yeah,
doesn't
me
bother me
either.
that much, for the very simple reason that doctrine has a way of working itself out. It's always messy. It's
Yes,
always tied up with politics,
yes,
and both ecclesiastical politics and general, cultural and civilizational movements, finding the way to articulate what the faith has always been in a way that uh, makes sense and is appropriate to the times in which we live, has always been, well, the work of the church. And it is messy, it takes time, and it's never done.
yeah.
It's
No, I agree,
old
and I think,
old houses, you're always working on them.
yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, the tratosphere, the radical traditionalists, they're out there screaming that Pope Francis is a heretic and therefore an anti-pope, and he's at least guilty, if they don't go to that extreme, of all kinds of doctrinal confusions and so on. Actually, if you read Pope Francis's writings, I mean, I don't see where he's so guilty of all kinds of doctrinal confusions. People often say, "Well, then why? What's your beef with Pope Francis?" My beef with Pope Francis is that he has reignited a judicial case that's already been litigated, and I don't care to relitigate it. And that has to do with the proper reception of Vatican II and the kinds of prelates and bishops and priests to implement that vision. I think JP2 and Benedict gave us the proper reception of the Second Vatican Council. They didn't always give us the bishops and so on to follow that vision. Sometimes they give us rather reactionary bishops, I think. Sometimes not. But anyway, the point is that Pope Francis, in my opinion, has re-empowered a wing of the church that I had hoped would never be re-empowered, because I believe that wing of the church, the progressive wing, is a dead end. I think the Pope is playing a dangerous game here. He, I don't think he wants to give to the progressive wing of the church everything that they want, their wish list, and he hasn't, so he's not a progressive. But I think he prefers their pastoral style. I think what this Pope is about is a certain revision of moral theology. And I think he's about accompaniment and discernment and all the, a more accompanying church and all that. And I think he prefers the style, the pastoral style of the progressives, which is why he's re-empowered them. And yet I think he's going to get burned by that. And I think that's a move designed to divide the church and to take it backwards. What do you think of my take there? That's my sort of spin on what Francis is sort of up to try and interpret why. On one hand, he hasn't given the progressives nearly anything that they want, and on the other hand, he's re-empowered all of them.
Well, I don't know, Larry. It doesn't seem to me that he has anything like the capacity for uh, calculus
Stratagems.
that sort of thing would take. I think that in its effect, you're not entirely wrong. Although you do point out that you hadn't given him much,
No, no.
and uh, that's important. Um,
Yes.
the the big things that he's given them, are the points on which they are actually least pastoral, which is liturgy and
Yeah.
actually accompanying people who are in irregular situations in life.
Yeah.
Well, give them communion so they'll stop crying is not pastoral care.
That's right.
um
That's right.
and uh taking away the Latin mass because there were a few maladjusted individuals who were loud and mean on the internet just makes it's psychotic. I think I said that the last time we talked. But
Well, I think it is
so
psychotic. Yeah.
so there you have it, right?
But
um
yeah, I'm hard on the traditionalists, but by golly, I was against Traditionis Custodes as well because I thought it was vindictive, petty, and draconian.
and I don't get that. um all of that to say, though, that my take is perhaps rather more prosaic, but not to say pedestrian. And it's that Francis himself confuses the teaching role with the governing role.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
The teaching munus, as it were, with the governing munus. And you think of Amoris Laetitia. Well, wow, have you ever seen so much ink spilt over a footnote? For crying
No,
out
I
loud.
haven't. One
And that's
footnote. Yeah.
both, and that's on both, on every, or both sides, on every side of that. You should just stop, fellas. It's going to be fine. But the reason it wasn't fine was that Francis said, "Oh, well, I want to have a, I want to start a conversation, right? Okay, well, you want to have a conversation, and you think that pastors and confessors need to have a more lenient approach to people in irregular situations. uh, I got no trouble with that.
Me
But
either.
say that and let people figure out a way to do it on the ground. When you go from I just want to start a conversation to we're going to skip the conversation part of that and start enacting particular legislation, right? And then the Pope throwing his own weight of approval behind certain attempts at legislating reception of the talking points that he articulated in Amoris. You go, well, how did we get here from there? um and to me, that was the thing that created a lot of the hard feeling and a lot of the
Yeah.
problems and the tension
Yeah.
around that, and we still have. And it turns out that was sort of paradigmatic when it comes to Francis's governance,
Yeah.
such as it is.
Yeah. Throw a little ambiguous bomb out there, muddy up the waters. And then when things get confusing, step back and remain silent and just let the chips fall where they may. That doesn't seem to be governance to me.
And you gotta do. I don't remember. Do we need legislation to implement an apostolic exhortation, which is, I mean, all that is an official encourage. It's an official encouragement of the church, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We need to implement that, really? Do we? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a very low level magisterial document, really, an apostolic exhortation. So,
and that's that, and that's that again, that's all fine. Because nobody cares outside the Catholic bubble.
no,
And
they don't. Excuse me. And
yeah, see, you're literally yawning right now.
no, it's the
That's where we
effect of
at.
my maker's mark catching up to me here
All
now,
right. See?
and the fact that it is 7:30 at night. I've been up. So I'm a chronic insomniac, and it gets worse as I get older. And I've been up since about 3:30 this morning. So it's all just sort of, but no, it's not you, Christopher, at all. It's just my body reacting to the time of day and the bourbon and whatnot. But the thing is about
Old
Amoris.
man Chapp on the farm. Yeah. All
Oh
right.
yeah, old man Chapp. But the thing is, yeah, to me, the whole Amoris Laetitia dust up is paradigmatic of all the controversies surrounding this papacy. Because on the one hand, as you point out, it's just an encouragement. It's a very low level magisterial document. He has not changed the official church teaching that a Catholic can only be sacramentally married once. All right, he hasn't changed that. It's still in place. So he's fudged it a little bit with a footnote that says priests on the ground can give what is essentially, after a period of discernment, a de facto annulment to somebody and say, with a wink and a nod, go to communion because we all know your first marriage wasn't really valid and all that kind of stuff. That was already happening all over the world. It was already happening. And in some ways, that little footnote is just like a ratification of something that's already happening.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's that it said all of that. Some of the implementations that we saw, and don't quote me on which ones. I can't remember whether it was the Maltese one or the Buenos Aires one
The
or
Buenos Aires and Maltese, yeah.
the German one. There were there were different ones out there. But I mean, look, the reason for the law is to protect the faithful from scandal,
That's right.
and it's perfectly legitimate. But if you have people who are, you know, they're firmly proposed, to firmly resolved to well, at least try to live chastely, but for whatever reason can't separate, and
Yeah.
are living together, until they regularize their situation, if they're not going to a mass, where everybody knows them as an irregularly married couple.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
there are ways to do what is good for everybody, that as a matter of fact don't give scandal. And if you want to say, look, guys, I understand that you're in a tough spot here, and life is messy, and I get it, and my door is always open. Come to see me anytime you need to. We can work it out. Great, and I'm all for that too. We give all sorts of there are people who are porn addicts, compulsive masturbators, perverts of every kind, who are
Yeah.
daily mass goers, and God bless them, and frequently avail themselves of the sacrament of reconciliation, and are able to receive communion. I don't know why, two people who have simply, got caught up in the messiness of life while nature was taking its course,
Yeah.
should be treated more harshly. Um,
Well, I
but
agree.
that said, I think the thing that got people's goat, and I think was quite legitimate, was the idea that sometimes it was for all practical purposes, and sometimes it was that no, Francis is teaching us what the church has always taught. And if you don't see how that's what you should be trying to do is get, the established teaching to square with this new teaching. And if you can't do that, then there's something wrong with you. And in any case, it's the established teaching that has to go. And I mean, my response to that is, well, but we're Catholics, we're not Mormons.
Yeah, we don't get a new revelation.
This isn't. Yeah, exactly. The papacy is not oracular.
Yeah,
and it just doesn't work like that. And
not to interrupt, when you attempt to make it work like that,
the accusations of malafides and all of these things, it just that I don't know. I got very little patience for that sort of thing.
I can tell. And the thing is, when you try to make it work like that, like it's oracular, and things just seem to be able to summarily change at whim, you end up undermining confidence and belief in the entire edifice, because now it really does seem just rather arbitrary. Yeah, so I mean, let's face it, the whole divorce and full disclosure, I'm divorced, remarried, annulled. I'm benefited. I'm also, a lot of my viewers and listeners may not know this. I'm actually a laicized deacon as well. I was 2 months away from ordination to the priesthood. I was an ordained deacon when I decided not to become a priest. So I got laicized as deacon. Then I got married, divorced, and annulled. So I like to tell people I'm trying to receive every canonical procedure that the church has to offer in the form of dispensations and whatnot from various things. Or as I tell other people, man, oh man, I don't look good on paper.
Yeah, this is the sacramental version of hitting for the cycle, Larry.
That's right. But my one and only true sacramental marriage to my current wife has lasted 25 years. I had our anniversary last week. So there's that feather in my cap, but that is all because of her and very little because of me. But anyway, I digress with something personal, but I just brought it up to say I'm not trying to be, judgmental or pharisaical here. I'm well aware of the situations people get themselves into, and I myself was in one, and I availed myself of the church's mercy, in canonical mercy, let's put it that way. But the fact does remain. I like very much your insight in your comment, Christopher, about how that's just not the way things are meant to work, where you've got the church's teaching, and then you've got this harsh cultural reality. And so you try to come up with a modus vivendi, and it doesn't work. So you end up just discarding the church's teaching. We're Catholics. You cannot do that. And to the extent that Amoris Laetitia sort of gave the impression that that's what we were doing, I think that's what upset a lot of people. I think that's what upset the Dubia Cardinals, whatever their motives may have been, some of them. I do think that was ultimately, they were expressing precisely that sentiment. What is going on here?
Yeah, and I don't look. I'm sure that their motives were pure as the driven snow. Okay, it was, it was not great form for them to go public the way that they did, and when they did. In fairness, they hadn't got an answer. They weren't going to get an answer. They probably had knew that or had figured it out. And
Well, they may have even
they
been told sub rosa that they weren't going to get an
get
answer.
a yeah, and there there's a lot of human nature going around these days, Larry, and
Yeah, yeah, that sure is.
red hats are as
Yeah,
susceptible of it as anybody else, and
absolutely.
you can rationalize behavior. But I mean, I remember sitting there saying at the time, one, these are good questions; they're legitimate questions.
Yeah,
Two, if I were Pope, I'd have their hats.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so probably better for everybody that I'm not, because
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a good thing I was never rector of a seminary. Good thing you're never pope.
uh,
Yeah,
yeah, there would
yeah.
there'd be you don't want that.
No, but I think you're right about it was poor form for the Dubia Cardinals to go public in that regard.
I mean, not
Especially
absolutely speaking, maybe, but it struck me that they kind of went off half cocked. And
well, also just on a purely prudential level, you had to know that if you're going to go public, you're throwing down a gauntlet to the Pope, and he's not going to like that, which means it's going to be counterproductive. You're not going now. You're really never going to get an answer to your Dubia questions.
yeah, you didn't poke the bear. You kicked the hornet's nest at the bear.
That's right. Exactly.
And you shouldn't be surprised at what happens. And Francis was, I think, remarkably patient and restrained with respect.
Well, the fact that he didn't take away their red hats, he didn't call them to Rome for a scolding session or whatever. He just ignored it. He just ignored the whole kerfuffle, and moved on. And but anyway, I mean that's all
And
water.
maybe we should too.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to rehash.
Along with Pachamama and all that other
Oh
stuff.
Lord, don't get me started on that.
Well, I mean, I wrote something. I don't remember what it was. Catholic World Report or something. I can't remember now. I just, a lot of people made a big deal about Pachamama. It's idol worship in the Vatican. Of course, Dr. Taylor Marshall paid those Austrian kids to go down there and toss the poor Pachamamas into the Tiber.
Has that been established? I don't know.
Oh yeah. Well, Taylor Marshall admitted it on his YouTube video. He said that he was. So I hope he never plans on going to Rome again, because he could probably be arrested for complicity in theft and property damage or whatever. But my take on the whole Pachamama affair was just a bunch of fat Germans trying to do something in terms of optics for the modern world. Yeah, let's get some sort of indigenous image up here so we can parade it around and look all inclusive and whatnot. I just think it was a ham-fisted attempt at optics. That's all it was, in my opinion. Maybe a few people behind the scenes were hoping to introduce pagan idol worship into the Vatican. I think that's a reach. What do you think?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Look, you know about the Chinese rights controversy.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't, Matteo Ricci, who's on his way to beatification now.
Yes, he is.
Praise God. One of my favorite Jesuits, has been for as long as I can remember, allowed the Chinese practice of venerating ancestors with there were ritual acts of veneration.
Yes.
All right. The needle that he threaded was basically that this is a civil cult. It's not religious. It's not
right.
Worship properly speaking. And so it participating in these rights, these civic rights, was not incompatible with the practice of Christian faith. Not everyone agreed with him. And it made lots of people, Dominicans and Franciscans especially, who were also active in the mission field in China, not as successful as the Jesuits had been, in those days. And that's not to badmouth the Dominicans or the Franciscans, okay? Not all the Jesuits were 100% comfortable with this either. It was a complex and a complicated situation, but the Jesuits had success, especially at court, and in among the civil service and senior ranking officials in the imperial bureaucracy. And those are the people that you want to convert, because these are cultural leaders, right?
Yeah.
And long story short, back and forth over decades and more than 100 years, if memory serves, eventually Rome put a kibosh on the
Yes.
on the rights, and that the Jesuits fought a hard battle. They argued and advocated for themselves as best they could. They worked around the strictures that were in place as best they could, and eventually, when there was nothing else for it, they obeyed. And the whole episode left a scar, right? What took place in the Vatican gardens, looked bad. I don't think it was.
Yeah.
Anything like what the folks who were exercised, most exercised about it, thought and said it was. It
Yeah,
was
I mean,
it was a missed opportunity and a PR fail of epic proportions. I might put it this way, that it was an attempt to troll the trads that ended up at trolling the Pope.
Exactly.
And I don't think that turn of phrase is my coinage. I think I've just stolen that from somebody, but I can't remember who.
It's okay.
And
we'll pretend it came from you.
It doesn't really matter.
See, the thing is,
but yeah, may I, Larry? I sorry. I wanted to say that it would have been pretty easy to say, look, we were sort of surprised by that. But the purpose of this whole synod is to allow some space to people who have suffered tremendously in and for the church, and we're gonna help them.
Yeah. Oh, I think your screen froze. And we've lost Christopher's Zoom link. And so, I mean, we've been going now for about an hour. And so I think we'll just go ahead and wind it up there. Sorry for the abrupt ending, but just with regard to the Pachamama affair, I agree with what Christopher was saying. I think there was an ersatz quality to it. I don't think it really was like the Chinese rites situation completely, because that was a very, I think, serious and effort at
Are
things.
we?
Go ahead. Are you back?
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Well, your video is frozen, and then we lost your audio for a bit.
All
But
right.
I was just
Well,
sort of saying maybe it's a good time to wrap up. And I was responding to your comments. They're saying, yeah, I agree with what you said. I think to a certain extent there was an ersatz quality to the whole Pachamama affair. It's not. I don't think it rose to the level of actual theological seriousness that the Chinese rites affair did. And I think the reason why, as you said, no explanation really came that would have really helped, to clarify this is what we were doing with Pachamama, was because I do think that in some ways it was an attempt at trolling the trads. If you're gonna troll the trads, you're not going to throw them throw them a bone afterwards. You're just going to let them hang there. But anyway, are you? Oh, you good? You're back. And I'm
I am
that.
back. Sorry about that. No, I was just saying that where I cut out, I think what I was trying to say, and I am sorry about that little technical glitch there. I'm pretty sure it was on my end. That you know, it would have been really easy to say. I understand that people were upset by what they saw, but we know that folks could have found it quite upsetting. In fact, it was quite surprising to us too. But the purpose of this
Yeah.
exercise was to give space to people who've suffered greatly in and for the church, and to allow them to show us who they are and what they do,
Yes.
and that not all of their cultural expressions will be perfectly familiar or even comfortable, but that's okay. And we promise that nothing untoward was intended or actually really performed
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
conducted. Um, and the whole thing would have gone away before it even started.
Yeah.
Uh, and that didn't happen. Instead, you had people denying the evidence of their senses, saying that
Yeah.
there were no prostrations. Well, but there were. Now
We saw them.
explain. We saw them with our own eyes.
Yeah.
Explain the prostrations. Don't deny that they happened. You know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. There was clearly, very, very highly unusual, at least para ritual uh that was going on. And when people see things that they're unfamiliar with, and that look a whole lot like things that people should be upset about, right?
Yeah.
Then give folks an explanation. And that shouldn't be too hard, and it shouldn't be hard to offer one and to be very frank and forthright about it. And that just didn't happen. Instead, well, we all saw what happened.
Yeah. We saw what happened, and the whole brouhaha ensued, and the poor Pachamamas ended up in the Tiber. I do believe that they were eventually
Yeah, they were recovered, and that's
retrieved from the
to the
Tiber. By
to
the
the
way,
good.
speaking of the Tiber, as we end our discussion here, we're at about an hour and a half. I was in Rome, as you know, last week, and I had read articles. That Italy has been in a drought, and that the levels of the Tiber were very low. But I have to say, when I was there, the Tiber was actually not low at all. So I was happy to see that. But there were no Pachamamas floating down the Tiber.
Well,
Um,
this time of year, it can get pretty high. I'm trying to. I don't think it ever, it didn't overflow the banks, but it would get up, and water would splash on the bridges every once in a while.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I remember one time when I was there, and oh my goodness, there were like big tree. There was a huge storm, and there were big tree trunks that were pushed up against the bridges and whatnot, and the water was piling up, but it still never flooded. You know, so it can get high. Well,
you're,
uh,
you're taking me back. Yeah.
yeah, Christopher is married to an Italian woman, Esther, lovely woman, and so yeah, Christopher lived in Rome for many years, and so you know better than I the ways of the Tiber River. I had a glorious time in Rome, as you know, Rome is my favorite place in the world. I have to say though, this trip of mine to Rome this time was very different from all of my previous visits to Rome, and not that my viewers give a care about. No, I'm droning on and on about my personal experiences, but when I'd been to Rome before, it was always as simply someone on a vacation to have fun. This is actually my first time there. That was kind of a working trip because I did a lot of writing for publications on the funeral when I was there, and it was an altogether sort of
A bit of a pilgrimage as well.
yeah. Oh, it was a
And you were
pilgrimage.
there to
Yes. Well, and that's what the writing was based on. It was first and foremost a pilgrimage and not a vacation. It was a spiritual homage and respects to Papa Benedict, who I love dearly, and then on top of that, it was a working trip. So yeah, it was a very different experience this time, more somber, and but actually, I nevertheless I still loved it. It was a great time. But anyway, Christopher, do you have any last thoughts before we? I always like to sort of keep these things about an hour and a half. That's a purely arbitrary rule on my part, it has to do with my own attention span. Uh, but also, I think that I mean, I know some podcasts go on for like 3 hours and stuff. I don't know. People can break it up, but I think that's too long. So, do you have any last words for the viewers?
yeah. Boy.
Anything we haven't discussed? I mean, like I said, an hour
Well,
and a half, whatever, but we
I
can go
mean,
if you want.
yeah. I mean, you keep asking the questions, and I'll keep answering. And I love talking to you, Larry. I do.
Well, thanks.
And you know that. We don't get to
Well,
do it. We don't get to do it often enough.
that's true.
And uh, boy, what would I say? Look, I ain't a guru. I'm nobody to set up as an example of anything. So the idea that I should give advice, wow, hell, my own.
Well, I mean, whether you want to admit it or not, Chris, I mean, you're getting on in years, so there's a sort of senior statesman quality to you now, where you're
Oh
like
boy.
an elder in the room. So smoke 'em peace pipe, and as I was doing here this evening myself, and
Yeah, boy,
it,
I envy you. I've been, yeah, Pulley. I switched I gave up the pipe a good while ago. Every once in a while, I do take to the vaping machine. But the what can I say? Look, folks, um, it's gonna be fine. All right.
yeah, this too
It,
shall
it's
pass.
it's going to be fine.
Yes.
Uh, if you want me to say it in sort of a pious and overly devotional tone, I can.
Not necessary.
The but our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has won the final victory over sin and death, and nothing can ever take that away. The gates of hell shall not prevail.
And
Uh, the bark of Peter will come safely to port. Uh,
yes.
what shape the bark is in? Eh,
Well, you know,
I got a nickel says I said that too the last time. So, I mean, folks are getting sort of a Chris and Larry Redux here, but what can I tell you? I don't have any new material, Larry.
well, that's good. Neither do I. I'm
And
it's crazy, but the bark of Peter, I like that. You don't know what shape it's going to be in. There have been a lot of
and
papal
there's
occupants of the bark of Peter have done their best to run it into the rocks. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
what's the old Belloc quote about that? You know the one I'm talking about.
oh yeah, the proof that the
The
church
cat,
is a divine
yeah,
origin. Yeah,
yeah, the divine or that the Catholic Church is of divine institution is something I am bound to hold. But if I were not, proof of it would be in the fact that no organization run with such knavish imbecility could last a fortnight.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think I didn't butcher that too badly, you know.
No, but that is
Uh,
definitely very close to it, and I think that's very true. And I think that's actually, I think, extremely good advice, because a lot of my blogging and YouTube videos and a lot of the journalism that you and I and others engaged in, I mean, you can lose the forest for the trees. You can start thinking that these problems are just enormous and insurmountable and so on, and they're not. I
and
think it was
I
Pope Benedict who said, in at the end, the victory is the Lord's.
and we're going to have bad times of it,
Yeah.
there are people in lots of the world, Christians, who are risking life and limb as we speak. They've got it really bad.
Oh,
uh
yeah, they
you
do.
know
Just to go to
so
mass.
just to yeah, putting things in perspective, right?
Yeah.
Uh, None of us are really worried about the end because we know how it ends. It's the part right before the end, and we'd all rather have to, skip that. But either we're coming to it or we're not, and there's nothing any of us can do about it. And so let's get on with our lives. If the bishops are a bunch of stuffed shirts, then it isn't the first time or the last time that will be true. And it doesn't make a whit of difference to what any single one of us can do right here, right now, to be ambassadors for Christ.
That's right. Well, and also, go
It,
ahead.
but the world needs the church, and people have a right to the gospel, and therefore to the church as Christ intended her to be. So both things can be true.
Yeah.
The watchdog function that journalists and informed commentators and laymen and women, especially, but not only, have today, I think, is hugely important. Precisely because the stakes are high, but we've always been playing out matters of eternal life and eternal death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are in every waking moment, and every waking or sleeping, we are. That's
Yeah.
just that's a fact. So let's get on with it. It's also true that we muddle
Yeah.
until our
Yeah.
Lord returns in glory. So let's be about it. I
Yes.
think I
I know.
ended my recent book with lines approaching remarks, like those last remarks.
Yeah.
But that's what you do in this
Yeah.
line of work. You call them as you call them as you see them, and you take the hits as they come, Larry.
And we're definitely muddlers. I'm a muddler. I'm muddling. I'm definitely muddling through. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there are serious issues, and we're not to take them lightly. And people have a right to the gospel, a right to the church, as Christ founded it. On the other hand, and need to keep all this in perspective. It's not the end of the world, and this too shall pass, and it is Christ's church at the end of the day, and the victory will be the Lord's, and we have to balance those two things together. That being said, we live in interesting times, that's for sure. I had a conversation, and in fact, my point of view would be we live in some really interesting times, perhaps some of the most interesting times in a very long time. And that's actually, as my friend David C. Schindler says, it's actually a privilege to be alive at such a moment, and not a catastrophe. So yeah, I mean, what's the old Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times, and
yeah, and whether that's a blessing or a curse,
whether it's a blessing or a curse, yeah, or whether it actually is an ancient Chinese proverb or just something, some urban legend Chinese proverb. I don't know, but it's a wise saying, whatever it is. Okay, so anyway, let's wrap this up. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And Chris, I know we don't talk enough. All that means is we need to do this again, and we will in the near future. Everybody, I think, knows by now the great esteem and respect that I hold you in as a journalist. And keep on trucking, dude. Keep to borrow a phrase from my own precious 1970s childhood. Keep on trucking. Keep on trucking and keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing great work for the church. And good luck in your teaching at Fairfield Prep. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Now.